The coffee cup crashed to the floor, its contents spreading across the marble like spilled secrets. Clara Dawson's hands shook as she stared at the resignation letter clutched in her fingers. 2 weeks' notice, carefully typed, ready to submit. Today was supposed to be her last day at Union Station. Tomorrow, she planned to board a Greyhound bus back to Ohio, back to her mother's house, back to admitting that some dreams are just too big for small people. But then the music started. It wasn't June's usual afternoon jazz. This was different. Desperate. A melody that sounded like crying without tears, like all the words she'd never been brave enough to say. Clara's head snapped up from the spreading puddle of cappuccino to see a stranger at the piano, a young man with shaking hands playing as if his life depended on it. And maybe it did. The morning commuters had stopped mid-stride. This wasn't background music. This was an emergency, a soul laid bare in B-flat minor. The stranger's technique was imperfect, his timing uneven, but the raw honesty in every note made Clara's chest feel like it might crack open. She knew that feeling. She knew what it meant to need music more than air. The stranger looked up mid-phrase, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he gasped to no one in particular. "I know I'm not supposed to. I just couldn't. My father died this morning, and I don't know how to." His hands fell away from the keys, leaving the melody unfinished, hanging in the air like a question without an answer. The silence that followed was unbearable. Without thinking, Clara stepped out from behind her coffee cart. Her resignation letter fluttered to the ground, forgotten. This shy girl who hadn't touched a piano in 4 years found herself walking toward the music like a moth to flame, drawn by recognition she couldn't name. "The melody," she whispered, standing beside the bench. "It wants to resolve to F major. Your father, he would want the sad parts to find peace." The stranger looked up at her with surprise. "You know music?" Clara's throat tightened. "I used to." He gestured to the bench. Could you help me finish it?" "I don't know how." Clara sat down carefully, her fingers hovering over the keys like they might burn her. For 4 years, she'd walked past this piano every day, never daring to touch it. But grief had a way of making the impossible necessary. She played the resolution he'd been searching for, gentle, hopeful, acknowledging the pain, but promising that dawn always follows darkness. The stranger joined her, and together they created something that was neither his sorrow nor her fear, but something entirely new. June materialized beside them as the last notes faded. She'd been watching from her usual spot, her own afternoon session forgotten. "I've been hoping for 3 months that you'd find a reason to remember who you are," June said softly to Clara. "I just never imagined it would be someone else's heartbreak that brought you home." Clara looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. "I was leaving today, had my resignation letter, and everything. And now," the stranger stood up, wiping his eyes. "Thank you," he said to both of them. "I couldn't have. I needed that more than I can say." He picked up Clara's crumpled resignation letter from the floor and handed it back to her. "Maybe this belongs in the trash instead." Clara took the letter, looked at it, then slowly tore it in half. "Maybe it does." As the stranger walked away, June sat down on the bench beside Clara. "So, for years of silence, and it takes a grieving stranger to remind you that music is how we heal each other." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "Of course you are, but you just did something beautiful. And I think," June smiled, pulling a small note from her pocket, "it's time you considered doing it again. On purpose this time." She handed Clara the note. "The shy girl who makes coffee has magic in her fingers. The world is ready when you are. Jay, sometimes it takes witnessing someone else's pain to remember our own capacity for healing." The next few days passed in a strange haze. Clara had torn up her resignation letter, but she hadn't yet found the courage to touch the piano again. Playing with the grieving stranger had been different. It was about helping someone else, not exposing herself. Now, every time she looked at the empty piano bench, her chest tightened with familiar fear. June had been watching, of course. She always was. "You know," June said during her usual afternoon session, Helping someone else find their voice doesn't count if you lose yours again in the process. Clara was restocking napkins, a task she'd been doing obsessively to keep her hands busy. That was different. He needed help, and you don't. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Clara's fingers stilled on the napkin dispenser. I proved I could still play. Isn't that enough? June's hands paused mid-melody. Honey, that's like saying you proved you could swim by jumping in to save someone from drowning. Noble? Yes, but it doesn't mean you're ready to dive in for yourself. She was right, and Clara knew it. The moment with the stranger had been pure instinct, muscle memory activated by compassion. But playing for herself? That required a different kind of courage entirely. I'm scared, Clara admitted. Of what? Of wanting it too much. Of failing again. Of everyone seeing that I'm not. Clara's voice trailed off. Not what? Good enough. Worth listening to. Worthy of taking up space. June stood from the piano bench and walked over to Clara's cart. Can I tell you something? My real name isn't June. It's Margaret June Williams, and I dropped out of Berklee College of Music 3 years ago after a panic attack during my junior recital. Clara looked up, surprised. I came here because nobody knew me. Nobody had expectations. I could just play, be, exist without judgment. June's voice grew softer. But you know what I learned? Playing to avoid judgment isn't really playing at all. It's just prettier hiding. That afternoon, after June left, Clara found herself alone with the piano. The station was quieter than usual, a lull between the lunch rush and evening commute. Perfect time to practice, if she had the nerve. She approached the bench like it might bite her. Her legs felt unsteady as she sat down, the same seat where she'd helped a stranger find peace 3 days ago. But this time, she was on her own. She started with scales, C major, simple and safe. Her fingers remembered the patterns even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not dead. But as she moved into something more complex, a simple Bach invention she'd learned in high school, her confidence faltered. This was different from helping someone else. This was about her, for her, and suddenly every note felt like an audition she might fail. Excuse me, miss. Clara's hands froze on the keys. Dina Caldwell stood behind her, arms crossed, navy uniform pressed to military precision. I wasn't aware we'd authorize piano performances during non-designated hours. Clara's face burned. I'm sorry, I was just what? This instrument is here for qualified musicians, not for. Dina's eyes swept over Clara dismissively. Coffee service employees practicing their hobbies. The words hit like physical blows. Coffee service employee. Hobby. The implication was clear. Clara didn't belong here, didn't deserve to make music, didn't have the right to take up space. I understand there was some sort of incident earlier this week, Dina continued. A disruption involving unauthorized performance. I trust that won't happen again. Clara nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. Good. I'm sure you understand we have standards to maintain. As Dina walked away, Clara felt 4 years of progress crumble in an instant. All the courage she'd found helping the stranger, all the hope June had planted gone. She was just a shy girl behind the coffee cart again, foolish enough to think she deserved to dream. But someone else had been watching. Someone who heard something different in her playing, even in its abbreviated form. Matthew Reyes stood near the information booth, having witnessed the entire exchange. He'd been coming to Union Station for 3 days now. Ever since he'd heard something extraordinary, a brief moment of musical magic that had stopped him in his tracks. He'd been here the day Clara helped the stranger, had watched her transform grief into grace with her touch. And now he'd watched a bureaucrat try to silence something beautiful before it could fully bloom. Matthew approached the security guard. The woman at the piano, do you know her story? Clara? Nice kid. Makes great coffee. Keeps to herself. Had some kind of musical training, I think. Helped that poor boy earlier this week when his father passed. Real class act. The woman who just spoke to her. Dina Caldwell. Station manager. Bit of a stickler for rules, if you know what I mean. The guard shrugged. Shame, really. Girl's got something special. You can hear it, even when she's nervous. That evening, Clara stayed late, long after her shift ended. The station was nearly empty, just a few stragglers and maintenance workers. She sat on a bench near the piano, not touching it, just looking. A small white orchid sat on the music stand with a note. Real talent doesn't need permission. It just needs courage. A friend. Clara looked around the empty station, her heart racing. Someone believed in her. Someone saw what she couldn't see in herself. The next day, she tried again. This time, she chose something safer, a gentle satie piece that felt like breathing instead of performing. Her hands were steadier, her heart calmer. And as she played, she noticed a man in an expensive suit watching from near the ticket windows. When she finished, he didn't approach. He just smiled and walked away. But Clara felt something shift inside her chest, the first stirring of possibility in 4 long years. Word had spread about the piano girl at Union Station. Maybe it started with the woman who'd complimented Clara's Debussy performance, or perhaps the teenager who'd posted a snippet on social media. Either way, by the following Thursday, a crowd 3 times larger than usual had gathered around the piano. This wasn't the organic, gentle audience that had formed around her quiet evening performances. These were people expecting a show, tourists with cameras, commuters who'd altered their routes specifically to witness what they'd heard about, someone with professional recording equipment. Clara's palms were sweating as she approached the piano, her usual route feeling like a walk to the gallows. June was there, sitting on a nearby bench, offering encouragement with her eyes, but her presence only intensified the pressure. This shy girl felt every gaze like a searchlight, every whisper like judgment carved into stone. Matthew Reyes stood by the same information booth where he'd been a week ago, watching carefully. He'd witnessed Clara's moment of pure musical compassion with a grieving stranger. He'd seen her tentative attempts to reclaim her voice. And now he was about to see what happened when private courage met public scrutiny. Clara sat down at the bench and immediately felt the wrongness of it all. The piano felt different surrounded by expectation. The keys seemed heavier under the weight of watching eyes. She chose something ambitious. The same Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 that had been haunting her thoughts since her conservatory days. It was the piece she'd been preparing when she'd had her breakdown 4 years ago. The piece that represented both her greatest musical love and her deepest trauma. Her fingers found the opening melody, strong and sure for the first few measures. The haunting theme emerged, beautiful and complex, the kind of music that could make strangers weep on subway platforms. Clara felt a moment of pure connection with the keys, with the music, with something larger than her fear. For 30 seconds, she was flying. Then the ghost crept in. What was she doing? Who did she think she was, playing Rachmaninoff in front of strangers? The same voice that had paralyzed her at 20 began whispering, "You're not good enough. You don't belong here. They're all waiting for you to fail." Her left hand stumbled on a chord progression she'd known by heart since she was 16. The rhythm faltered. Her breath caught in her throat like a sob. A harsh, discordant note rang out, echoing through the station like a gunshot in a cathedral. The melody collapsed. Clara's hands froze above the keys, as if the piano had suddenly caught fire. The silence that followed was worse than any criticism could have been. It was the sound of collective disappointment, of expectations crashing to earth, of a shy girl remembering exactly why she'd stopped trying in the first place. The crowd began to disperse immediately. Someone muttered, "Amateur hour," loud enough for Clara to hear. A teenager laughed and made a comment about epic fails to his friend. The man with the professional equipment shook his head in disgust and began packing up. "I warned you about this." Dina Caldwell materialized like a vulture circling roadkill, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose pessimism had been vindicated. "This is exactly why we have policies about unauthorized performances. You've embarrassed yourself, this station, and wasted these people's time. They came expecting quality, and instead they got..." She didn't need to finish. Clara knew exactly what she delivered instead. Clara fled to the storage room behind her coffee cart, tears streaming down her face like rain on windows. For years of careful emotional architecture collapsed in minutes. She tried. She'd been brave. She'd stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and the light had burned her alive. But Matthew had been watching with different eyes, listening with different ears. While everyone else heard the mistake, the failure, the embarrassing collapse of ambition meeting reality, Matthew heard something else entirely. He pulled out his phone and listened to the recording he'd made. Not of the failure, but of those first 30 seconds when Clara had been transcendent. He wasn't hearing the discordant note that had sent everyone away. He was hearing the sophisticated musical choice that preceded it, the emotional honesty that couldn't be taught in any conservatory, the delicate touch that remained beautiful even in panic. More importantly, he was remembering what he'd witnessed a week ago. This same woman helping a complete stranger transform grief into grace. That hadn't been a performance, it had been ministry. And the woman who could do that, who could channel such compassion through music, was someone worth believing in. Matthew approached the security guard who'd been watching the drama unfold with visible sympathy. The young woman who was just playing, I understand she works here, Clara Dawson, makes the best cappuccino in downtown LA, works harder than anyone I know. Real shame what just happened. The guard shook his head. Girl's got something special, just not built for crowds, I guess. Has she played here before? Few times recently. Actually helped a young man through a real rough patch last week. His father had died, and she sat down and played with him until he could stop crying. Most beautiful thing I've seen in 30 years of working here. Matthew felt pieces clicking into place. Tell me about that. Kid was falling apart at the piano, couldn't finish what he was trying to play. Clara just sat down and helped him find the ending he needed. Didn't say much, just knew what the music wanted to do. The guard's voice grew softer. Takes a special kind of person to do that for a stranger. Yes, Matthew said quietly. It does. That evening, Clara found a small white orchid on the piano bench. Not expensive, but carefully chosen. Tucked beneath, it was a note written in confident, masculine handwriting. I saw 2 performances today. One was technically perfect, but emotionally empty. The other started beautifully and ended messily, but it was real. The world needs more real. MR. Clara looked around the nearly empty station, her heart hammering for entirely different reasons. Someone had been watching. Someone had heard something worth believing in, even in her failure. The next morning, she found herself drawn back to the piano despite everything. This time she chose something simpler, a gentle satie piece that felt like breathing instead of performing. Her hands were steadier, her expectations lower. And as she played, she noticed the same man in the expensive suit watching from near the ticket windows. When she finished, he approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to making decisions that mattered. Excuse me, I'm Matthew Reyes. He offered his card with both hands, the gesture somehow both formal and respectful. I run a production company called Harmony Vision Productions. We're developing a series called The Sound of the City, showcasing authentic musical voices in urban spaces. Clara stared at the card, as if it were written in a foreign language. Harmony Vision Productions, New York City. A phone number that probably connected to offices with floor-to-ceiling windows and assistants who made more money than Clara had ever imagined. I don't understand, she whispered. I've been watching you play, not just yesterday, but last week too. When you help that young man with his grief, you have something that can't be taught and can't be faked. The ability to use music as healing. Sometimes our greatest failures become our most important auditions. You want me? But I'm just... Clara's voice trailed off like smoke dissipating in wind. How could she explain that she was just a shy girl who served coffee and had just humiliated herself in front of half of downtown LA? How could she make him understand that she was nobody special, nobody worth investing in, nobody worth the kind of attention that came with business cards and production companies? You're just what? Matthew's voice was gentle but insistent. the tone of someone who'd learned that the most important conversations often happened in the spaces between words. I'm nobody special. You saw what happened yesterday. Everyone did. I froze up completely, played like a beginner, embarrassed myself and everyone who was watching. The words tumbled out like confessions, each one heavier than the last. Matthew studied her face for a long moment, seeing something she couldn't see herself. I saw 2 performances yesterday, Clara. Can I call you Clara? She nodded, confused. I saw someone play the opening of Rachmaninoff's Second with more emotional truth in 30 seconds than most concert pianists manage in 30 minutes. And then I saw fear take over, which is human and understandable and has nothing to do with talent. But everyone left. They were disappointed. They were expecting entertainment. I was looking for something else entirely. Matthew's voice grew warmer. You see, I was also here last week when you helped that young man through his grief. I watched you sit down with a complete stranger and turn his pain into something beautiful. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Clara looked up, surprised. You were here that day? I've been coming here for 2 weeks, ever since a colleague mentioned hearing something special at Union Station. I came expecting to scout location for our show, but instead I found something much more valuable. He pulled out his phone and played a brief recording. It was her, from the day with the stranger, the moment when their 2 melodies had merged into something transcendent. This is why I'm here, Clara. Not because you're technically perfect, though your technique is excellent, but because you understand something most musicians never learn, that music isn't about you. It's through you. Clara felt tears threatening again, but this time they felt different. I don't understand what you're offering me. A chance to remember who you are, a chance to use your gift the way it was meant to be used, to heal, to connect, to remind people that beauty exists even in broken places. She shook her head. But I can't perform. You saw what happens when people are watching. I fall apart. So we don't start with performing. We start with being, with playing, with recording you doing what you do naturally, making music that matters. Matthew's voice grew more animated. Clara, most of the musicians I work with can play anything perfectly and say nothing. You played imperfectly yesterday and said everything. But I have responsibilities. This job, rent, student loans from a conservatory degree I never finished. The practical part of her mind was finally engaging, the part that had kept her safe for 4 years. I'm not asking you to quit tomorrow. I'm asking you to consider that maybe there's another way forward. We start small, some recording sessions, see what emerges. You keep your job for now, but you give yourself permission to explore what might be possible. That weekend, Clara made the call she'd been avoiding for months. Her mother answered on the second ring. Clara? Honey, what's wrong? The immediate concern in her mother's voice reminded Clara how long it had been since they'd talked. Nothing's wrong, Mom. Something might be right. Someone offered me a chance to play again. Really play. Professionally. The silence on the other end stretched, so long Clara wondered if the call had dropped. Oh, sweetheart. Her mother's voice was thick with emotions Clara couldn't untangle. I always wondered if you'd find your way back to the piano. I was so afraid to ask, afraid to hope, afraid to add any pressure to what you were already carrying. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm just fooling myself into thinking I have something worth sharing? What if I disappoint everyone who believes in me? Clara, baby, you've been disappointing yourself for 4 years. Maybe it's time to try disappointing others instead. Her mother's laugh was watery but warm. Besides, do you remember what you used to say when you were little? Whenever you made a mistake during practice? Clara did remember, suddenly and completely. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. That's right. You were 7 years old, and you already knew something it took me 43 years to learn. Maybe it's time to trust that little girl again. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Los Angeles weather that felt borrowed from somewhere sadder. Clara found June at the piano as usual, but today she was playing something mournful and complex, her fingers moving like prayer across the keys. I heard about your opportunity, June said without looking up from the melody. Are you going to take it? How did you? News travels fast in the music world. Especially good news. June's hand stilled, and she turned to face Clara directly. You know, I've been hoping for months that someone would recognize what I've been seeing in you. I never imagined it would happen quite like this. I'm scared, Clara admitted, the words feeling both heavy and liberating. Of course you are. That's how you know it matters. That's how you know it's real. June reached in her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. This came for you this morning. The courier said it was urgent. Inside was a plane ticket to New York, a hotel reservation, and a note from Matthew. No pressure, no contracts, no promises. Just possibility. Our studio is available next Thursday, if you're ready. If not, the ticket is open-ended. Take all the time you need to find your courage. M.R. Clara stared at the ticket for a long time, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. What if I fail again? What if you don't? June's voice was gentle but firm. What if you're exactly who the world has been waiting for? What if your imperfection is what makes you perfect for this moment? That afternoon, Clara made the call that would change everything. Matthew, it's Clara. If I say yes, what happens next? We start with music. Just you, a piano, and a recording studio. No audience, no pressure, no expectations except that you be yourself. We capture what you do naturally and see where it wants to go. And if I freeze, if I can't do it, then we'll figure out how to work with that. Some of the most beautiful music comes from broken places, Clara. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. Clara thought about the shy girl she'd been. The one who'd believed her worth was measured in perfect performances and flawless execution. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, the one who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but music in spite of it. Okay, she whispered, then stronger, yes. Let's try. Clara, Matthew's voice was warm with something that sounded like relief. Thank you for trusting this process, for trusting yourself. After she hung up, Clara sat at the piano and played. Not for an audience, not for approval, but for the joy of making sound into meaning. And for the first time in 4 years, she didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. 3 weeks later, Clara stood backstage at the Downtown Music Center, her hands trembling as she adjusted the simple black dress Matthew's team had helped her choose. Through the red curtain, she could hear the audience settling into their seats. 200 people who'd come see the first live taping of The Sound of the City, a show that existed because a shy girl had been brave enough to fail in public. The venue was intimate, more coffee house than concert hall, with warm lighting and round tables that made conversation feel more natural than performance. Matthew had chosen it specifically for Clara, understanding that she needed to feel like she was sharing music rather than delivering it. How are you feeling? Matthew appeared beside her in the wings, his presence as calming as it had been since that first day at the station. Like that shy girl from the train station who couldn't even play scales without shaking, Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Good? That means you haven't forgotten where you came from. That means you're still connected to what makes your music true. He handed her a small wrapped box, its paper worn soft with handling. This belonged to Elena, the woman who gave me my chance when I was 17. She saved it for 30 years, told me to pass it on when I found someone who needed it more than I did. Clara's fingers shook as she unwrapped it. Inside was a silver bracelet, its surface worn smooth with time, engraved with words in elegant script. Courage is not the absence of fear, but music in spite of it. E.R. Elena Rodriguez. Clara read the initials, her voice breaking. She wanted it to go to someone who understood that the most beautiful music comes from the places where we're most afraid to look. Someone who'd learned that perfection is the enemy of truth. Clara's eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over onto her carefully applied makeup. Matthew, I don't know if I can do this. What if I freeze again? What if I disappoint everyone who believes in me? Then you'll be human. And that's exactly what the world needs to hear. Matthew's voice was gentle but firm. You already have done this, Clara. Every day, for 3 weeks, you've chosen courage over comfort. Tonight is just another note in the song you've been writing since the moment you decided to try again. Clara fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling the weight of history and hope it carried. What if I'm not enough? What if you're exactly enough? What if your imperfection is what makes you perfect for this moment? As the stage manager called places, Clara walked toward the lights that would expose everything she was and wasn't. The piano waited center stage, not the tired upright from Union Station, but a gleaming grand that seemed to hold infinite possibility in its curves. She saw the sea of faces and felt the familiar panic rising like tide water. But then she spotted June in the third row, beaming with pride and holding a sign that read, "For all the shy girls who forgot they were brave." In the back corner, impossibly, sat Dina Caldwell, who'd driven down from the station to see the woman she'd once silenced find her voice. And there, in the front row, was her mother, tears already streaming down her face, clapping like her daughter had already performed miracles. Clara sat at the grand piano and closed her eyes, letting the silence settle around her like a prayer. When she opened them again, she spoke directly to the audience, her voice steady and warm. 3 weeks ago, I was just a shy girl who made coffee and dreamed of music she was too scared to play. Tonight, I'm still that shy girl. But I've learned something important. Being shy doesn't mean being silent. Sometimes it just means you choose your moments to be loud. She began with the piece that had brought her here, the same Rachmaninoff that had caused her to stumble in the station. But this time, she played it as herself, not as who she thought she should be. Not perfectly, but authentically. When she reached the place where she'd faltered before, she paused, smiled at the audience, and said, "This is where I learned that mistakes can be doorways." Then she played the error intentionally, let it hang in the air, and transformed it into something new, a bridge to a melody she'd been composing in her head for weeks, a song that told the story of finding courage in the wreckage of expectations. The music flowed like confession, like forgiveness, like the conversation between who she'd been and who she was becoming. The first movement became the second, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The audience disappeared. The stage disappeared. The shy girl who'd been afraid to take up space in the world disappeared, leaving only the music and the woman brave enough to let it live. When she finished, the silence stretched for a heartbeat that felt like eternity before erupting into applause that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than politeness. Clara opened her eyes to find a standing ovation, and for the first time in her life, she felt deserving of the recognition. Later, in the quiet green room that smelled of flowers and possibility, Matthew approached with an envelope that would change everything again. "There's something else, Clara. Something I've been waiting to discuss until after tonight." His voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Harmony Vision is opening a West Coast office. We need someone to run our emerging artist program. Someone who understands what it feels like to be overlooked, underestimated, and afraid." Clara looked at the offer letter, then at Matthew, then back at the letter that contained numbers and titles and responsibilities she'd never imagined. "You're asking me to help other people find their voices. I'm asking you to do what June did for you, what Elena did for me 25 years ago. I'm asking you to keep the music alive for people who think they've lost the right to make it." The letter detailed a position as director of artist development, with a salary that would let her move out of her studio apartment, pay off her student loans, and maybe even help her mother retire from the cleaning job she'd worked for 15 years to support Clara's musical education. But more than that, it offered purpose, a chance to be the person she needed 3 weeks ago. "You want me to run a program? I want you to build something that didn't exist when we needed it. A place where shy girls and scared boys and anyone who's been told they're not enough can remember they're exactly enough." Clara folded the letter carefully, her hands steady for the first time in weeks. "When do I start?" 6 months later, Clara stood in the same Union Station where her journey began, but everything had changed. She wasn't behind the coffee cart anymore. She was beside the piano with a group of nervous musicians, all preparing for their first public performance as part of Harmony Vision's Hidden Voices program. "Remember," she told them gently, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd walked this path herself, "you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be real. You're here to let the world hear what it's been missing. There was Marcus, a 60-year-old janitor who wrote symphonies on napkins during his lunch breaks. Sarah, a teenage foster kid who sang like an angel, but had never owned her own guitar. James, a veteran with PTSD who found peace in the piano keys when words failed him. All of them shy, all of them scared, all of them brave enough to try. As her students began to play, Clara thought about the shy girl she used to be, the one who was so afraid of making mistakes that she forgot the joy of making music. That girl was still part of her, would always be part of her. But now she knew something that girl didn't. Our greatest gifts often emerge not in spite of our fears, but because of them. The music rose around the train station like incense, like hope, like proof that beauty could bloom in the most unexpected places. Commuters stopped to listen. Children pressed their faces against windows. And somewhere in the crowd, another shy girl watched and wondered if she, too, might be brave enough to try.